Have you ever wondered what lies behind the perfect smile of those we admire from afar? This is the story of Theo Lake, a man whose words touched millions of lives, while he secretly questioned if he still believed them himself. In the glittering world of New York media, Theo's self-help empire reached every corner of America. His books lined the shelves of those seeking guidance. His voice filled living rooms through television screens. His smile, that confident, reassuring smile, convinced everyone he had all the answers. But in quiet moments alone, doubt had become his constant companion. Sometimes, our story begins, the only person who can make you honest is the one who never believed you in the first place. Autumn in New York painted Central Park in shades of amber and gold as Theo Lake prepared for his nationwide book tour. At 34, he had mastered the art of public inspiration, the perfect blend of vulnerability and wisdom that made audiences feel he was speaking directly to their souls. People don't want perfection, he often told his management team. They want authenticity. Yet privately, in the silence of his penthouse apartment, a question haunted him. When had the line between his public persona and private self begun to blur? When had the words flowing from his pen started to feel rehearsed rather than revealed? His latest book, Courage to Connect, sat on his coffee table, its cover featuring his own face, expression serene and knowing. 5 weeks at #1. On the bestseller lists, 2 million copies in print, and inside him a hollowness growing with each passing day. The Chicago event is confirmed for the 15th. His manager Richard announced during their planning meeting. We've already sold out the main hall. Wonderful, Theo nodded, though inside he felt that flutter of familiar anxiety. Another sea of faces looking to him for answers. He increasingly questioned whether he possessed. There's one other thing, Richard said, checking his notes. Melissa's taking maternity leave early. We need a temporary assistant for the tours. Can't we just pull someone from the office? 3 months on the road, nobody's volunteering. Richard slid a thin file across the table. HR sent over the top candidates. There's one who might work. And that's how Emma Brooks entered his life. She wasn't supposed to be notable. Her application stood out only because it was so remarkably unremarkable. Library assistant, content editor, no social media presence. A reluctant candidate for a tour no one else wanted. The interview was brief, a formality, really. Emma entered his office with quiet steps, her gaze meeting his only briefly before focusing somewhere around his shoulder. Brown hair pulled, back in a simple style, glasses that she adjusted nervously. Nothing about her commanded attention. Have you read any of my books? Theo asked, the standard question for assistants. Yeah. A simple answer, no elaboration, no flattery. And, he prompted, curious despite himself. They're thought-provoking. Again that slight hesitation. You don't sound convinced. For the first time she met his gaze directly. Something flickered in her eyes. Intelligence, certainly, but something else too. Appraisal. I think they raise valuable questions, she said carefully. Your first book especially. An unexpected answer. Most people preferred his newer work, more accessible, more solutions-focused. His first book, written before fame found him, was more philosophical, more questioning. From their first day working together, Emma defied expectations. While everyone else in Theo's world brandished iPads and spoke in exclamation points, she carried a worn leather notebook and spoke in measured, thoughtful sentences. While others sought his attention, she seemed content to remain in the background, observing. The tour began in Boston. Emma stood at the back, taking notes in that ever-present notebook. He hadn't expected her to edit his speeches. It began subtly, a comment written in the margins of his first draft for the Chicago opening event. Not criticism exactly, more like a question. When you say fear is just excitement without breath, what might someone feel who can't seem to breathe at all? He'd paused, considering it, then rewrote the passage entirely. Fear tells us where our growth awaits. But sometimes, before we can transform fear into possibility, we must first acknowledge its weight, the moments when breath itself seems impossible. The audience response that night was electric. His words, her words, touched something deeper. At the signing afterward, a woman with tears in her eyes gripped his hand. "It's like you could see right into me. I've been having panic attacks for years, and no one has ever described it so perfectly." Later, in the quiet of the hotel suite, he'd asked Emma about her note. "I didn't change anything," she'd said softly, fingers nervously adjusting her glasses. "I just wrote what the heart might truly hear." "How did you know?" he asked. "About panic attacks, about the feeling of not being able to breathe." A shadow crossed her face. "Some things you don't need to experience personally to understand. You just need to listen." As the tour progressed from city to city, Theo began to wonder, who was this unassuming young woman who seemed to understand his message better than he did himself? What would you do if you discovered the person helping you succeed was secretly your biggest critic? As Theo begins to uncover Emma's true identity, I'm curious, has someone ever seen through your carefully crafted image? Share your thoughts below, and if you're wondering whether these two opposites will find understanding or destruction when the truth fully emerges, stay with us. The mask is about to slip completely, and what happens next might change how you view your own relationships forever. Halfway through the tour, something had shifted between them. The professional boundary remained intact, but a tentative friendship formed in the quiet hours after events, Emma with her ever-present notebook, Theo gradually shedding the performative energy of his public self. In Atlanta, rain trapped them in the hotel for an entire day between events. With time unexpectedly free, they found themselves in the deserted hotel bar, conversations wandering beyond the immediate needs of the tour. "Why did you become interested in self-help literature?" she asked, stirring her tea. The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that in years, and I was lost once, he admitted. After college, I had this emptiness. I thought achievement would fill it, but that only made it worse. What changed? I was teaching high school English to pay the bills, but there was this student, brilliant, troubled. He asked me for a book that would help him make sense of his life. Theo smiled faintly. I gave him Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. The next day he came back and said, "This helped, but you should write something too, Mr. Lake." "You understand." Emma waited, sensing there was more, so I started writing, just reflections, questions, no intention of publishing, but it helped me find a path out of my own darkness. And eventually those notes became my first book. Questions Worth Living, Emma said, naming his debut work. The industry changes you, he said finally. Or maybe success does. The first book asks questions. The publishers wanted the second book to provide answers. Readers, too. They don't just want understanding, they want solutions. And do you have them? The solutions, the question was gentle, but it cut to the heart of his growing unease. I have approaches, perspectives, tools that have helped me and others. He paused. But lately I wonder if I've sacrificed complexity for clarity, if I've started offering certainty where none exists. What about you? He asked, wanting to shift the focus. Have you always been interested in this field? In understanding how people navigate suffering? Yes. Though my approach has been different. Different how? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I've been more interested in examining the limitations of self-help culture, the way it sometimes simplifies complex human experiences. A critic, then, Theo said with a smile. Something flickered across her face, too quick to name, but enough to make him wonder. An observer, she corrected. In Boston, during a radio interview, the host asked about critics who called his work superficial. What would you say to those who claim you're just packaging common wisdom in pretty language? The host had asked. Emma, standing at the back of the studio, had gone very still. Theo found himself looking to her as he answered. I'd say they might be right, he replied, surprising himself. Most wisdom isn't new, but sometimes we need to hear old truths in new ways before they can transform us. The host had moved on, But Theo noticed Emma writing intently in her notebook, a faint smile on her lips. That night, working late in the hotel lounge, Theo found his curiosity overwhelming. While Emma stepped away for coffee, he glanced at her open notebook. What he saw made his blood run cold. Original draft. Fear is the mind's way of protecting what matters most. Suggested revision. Fear is the heart recognizing what it cannot bear to lose. The revision wasn't what disturbed him. It was the notation beside it. L.H. Article May 2023 L.H. A critic whose scathing review of his last book had gone viral. A writer who had called his work emotional fast food served with genuine conviction. He quickly turned back to his own papers before Emma returned. But his mind was racing, connecting dots, remembering phrases that had seemed strangely familiar. The next morning, while Emma attended a meeting with local bookstore staff, Theo searched online for everything written by L.H. And there it was, line after line that Emma had subtly incorporated into his recent speeches. His initial shock gave way to a more complex emotion. She wasn't sabotaging him. If anything, his speeches had become more powerful, more resonant. With her input, she was using her own critical perspective to deepen his message, to make it more authentic, not less. But why? Why would his most articulate critic take a position as his assistant? That evening, after a tense day of avoiding direct conversation, they returned late to the hotel. As they walked in silence to the elevator, Emma suddenly spoke. "You don't need to search anymore. It's yes, I used to not believe in you." The elevator doors closed, and the truth now stood exposed between them. "For how long?" Theo asked as they rode upward in silence. "How long have you known that I knew?" "Since this afternoon," Emma replied. "You've been different today. Less present. Watching me instead of working with me." The elevator reached his floor. They stepped out together, the unspoken agreement that this conversation needed to happen. Inside his suite, Theo went to the window, looking out at the city lights, gathering his thoughts. Emma waited, her usual composure showing small cracks, fingers lightly tapping against her thigh, gaze darting around the room. The revelation of Emma's identity should have ended their working relationship. Logic dictated he should feel betrayed, manipulated, angry. Instead, Theo felt something unexpected: curiosity. "Why did you apply for this job?" he asked as they stood facing each other. "Was it to expose me? To gather material for another takedown?" Emma's composure faltered for the first time since he'd known her. "No, I wanted to understand how someone so intelligent could believe what you're selling." She met his gaze directly. "Or if you even did believe it yourself." The brutal honesty hit like a physical blow. "And what's your conclusion so far?" She considered this, choosing her words carefully. "I think you started with genuine insight. Then success demanded more books, more speeches, more certainty. And somewhere along the way, the questions that made your early work meaningful became inconvenient." Theo wanted to defend himself, to reject her assessment, but something stopped him. Perhaps the same integrity that had first inspired his writing. "So you've been, correcting me? Slipping your criticisms into my own words?" "Not correcting," she said. "Reminding, the questions you used to ask before you started selling answers." He moved to the small hotel bar, poured 2 glasses of water, handed one to Emma. A simple gesture of civility in an extraordinary moment. "Your reviews of my work were thorough," he said with a slight smile. "I particularly enjoyed being called a salesman of emotional duct tape for the wounds capitalism inflicts." She winced. "I stand by the analysis, if not the tone. I was younger then, more absolute in my judgments." "How old are you, Emma, really?" 28, not 25, as my application says. "And your background?" "Mostly accurate. I was a library assistant. I do have editing experience. I just omitted my work as a cultural critic for several online publications under the name L.H. Laura Hoffman," she supplied. "My mother's maiden name." The conversation lasted until dawn. Two people from opposite sides of a philosophical divide, finding unexpected common ground. Emma spoke of her background in literary criticism, her frustration with the self-help industry's simplifications, her reluctant admiration for the raw honesty in Theo's first book. My father lost everything following a guru who promised impossible transformations, she explained. Our family savings, his dignity, eventually his health. I've seen the damage false hope can do. And you think that's what I offer? False hope. I thought so, she admitted. Your earlier books, especially Questions Worth Living, were different. They acknowledged the messiness, the uncertainty. They offered companionship in difficulty, not escape from it. But the later ones, they began to promise too much. 7 steps to fulfillment, the secret to lasting happiness. Theo confessed his growing sense of isolation from his own words, the pressure to maintain an image of unwavering confidence, the fear that admitting doubt would destroy everything he'd built. Do you know what terrifies me most? He said as the first light of dawn crept through the windows. The thought that I've become what I most despised, someone who pretends to have it all figured out. But you haven't, Emma said. Not entirely. If you had, you wouldn't have responded to my edits. You wouldn't have allowed the questions back into your work. As morning light filtered through the curtains, they reached an unexpected agreement. Emma would continue as his assistant, bringing her critical perspective to his work openly rather than secretly. A collaboration born from confrontation. I still don't agree with everything you write, she told him. Good, he replied. I'm not sure I do either anymore. They might have continued this way, had fate not intervened. 3 days later, as they prepared for the Chicago event, Theo's manager burst into the green room, face ashen. We have a problem. He thrust his phone at Theo. On the screen was an email from a journalist containing old photos and screen captures. Emma, at literary events, articles under her pseudonym, and most damning, a side-by-side comparison showing how closely some passages in Theo's books resembled concepts she had previously criticized. She's not just a critic, she's claiming you plagiarized her. The reporter's going public tomorrow. Emma, standing frozen in the doorway, had heard everything. This isn't how it looks, she began, but Richard cut her off. Do you know what this could do to his reputation? To book sales? To the entire brand? Richard, Theo interjected quietly. Give us the room, please. When they were alone, the silence stretched between them, heavier than before. Is it true? Theo asked. Did I steal your ideas? Not intentionally, she said quietly. Great minds can arrive at similar insights independently, but yes, there are parallels that look problematic out of context. His team wanted her fired immediately, contracts with non-disclosure, agreements, legal threats to suppress the story. But that night, while everyone else strategized damage control, Theo went to Emma's hotel room. She answered his knock with resignation, already packing her belongings. I didn't come to fire you, he said wordlessly. She handed him a weathered notebook. Not her current one, but an older journal filled with years of thoughts, criticisms, and reflections. I wrote everything I thought about you before I knew. So you, she explained, and everything I've learned since becoming your assistant. Through the night, Theo read the chronicle of a mind wrestling with his ideas, first dismissing them, then questioning them, then reluctantly finding value, and finally identifying the man behind the message. One entry, dated just a week earlier, stood out. The tragedy isn't that Theo Lake might be wrong sometimes, it's that he's no longer allowed to be. Fame has become his prison. Every word must align with those that came before. No evolution permitted, no humanity allowed. The very vulnerability he champions for others is forbidden to him. The words struck him with the force of recognition. She had seen through him completely, not just his flaws, but the cage his success had built around him. The Chicago event loomed the next morning, the largest venue of the tour, a sold-out auditorium of 3,000 people. The management team had worked through the night, preparing a statement distancing Theo from Emma, preemptively addressing the brewing controversy. Backstage was chaos. Publicists huddled with lawyers, security briefed on removing Emma if she appeared, Richard pacing while barking orders into his phone. 10 minutes, Theo, the stage manager called. In his dressing room, Theo sat alone, staring at his reflection. The face looking back at him was polished, camera-ready, wrapped in a persona grown so familiar he sometimes forgot it wasn't his true self. Emma's words from her journal echoed in his mind. Fame has become his prison. 5 minutes before he was due on stage, he texted her, "Please come. I need you to hear this." When the lights dimmed and Theo walked to center stage, the applause was thunderous. He smiled, waited for silence, and then set aside his prepared remarks. "I want to tell you a story today," he began, "about something I've only recently come to understand." For the next 20 minutes, he spoke about masks, the ones we wear, professionally, the ones fame demands, the ones that begin as protection and end as prisons. "We talk about authenticity as if it's a destination," he said, "but what if it's actually a journey back to where we started? What if our truest self isn't something we become, but something we remember?" Without naming Emma, he described meeting someone who challenged his thinking, who held a mirror to parts of himself he'd been avoiding. This person was brave enough to tell me what I'd forgotten. That doubt isn't the enemy of wisdom, but its foundation. That questions matter more than answers, that the moment I became afraid to say I don't know was the moment I stopped growing. From her place at the back of the hall, Emma watched, tears streaming silently down her face. "The greatest gift we can offer each other," Theo continued, "isn't certainty. It's the courage to be uncertain together, to stand in the questions rather than rush to answers." The audience sat in rapt silence, witnessing not just a speech, but a transformation. "I've been afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that if I acknowledged doubts you would think less of me, afraid that vulnerability would be seen as weakness, afraid that changing my mind would invalidate everything I've said before." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "But here's what I'm learning. Our capacity to evolve our thinking isn't a liability. It's our greatest strength. Being. Wrong sometimes doesn't make us frauds. It makes us human." After the speech, which ended with a standing ovation, Theo declined the usual book signing. Instead, he asked his team for privacy, finding Emma waiting in a quiet corner backstage. "No." Words seemed adequate for the moment. She finally broke the silence. "Well, that wasn't in the content plan," he laughed, tension breaking. "No, but it was true." "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said, "we write the next chapter. Together." The article did run the following day. But instead of denying the connection between his work and Emma's criticisms, Theo gave an interview acknowledging their intellectual relationship, announcing that Emma Brooks would be credited as co-author on his next project, a dialogue between two perspectives rather than a monologue. The controversy became a conversation. The potential scandal transformed into a story of growth and reconciliation. 3 months later, as autumn gave way to winter, Theo and Emma sat side by side at a small bookstore in Brooklyn, their final stop on what had become a very different kind of tour. The new book, Dialogue, Finding Truth Between Perspectives, featured both their names on the cover. Inside was the chronicle of their journey, from critic and subject to collaborators to something neither had anticipated, kindred spirits. The audience that gathered was smaller than the massive crowds of the original tour. But the conversations were deeper, the connections more genuine. "What surprised you most about working together?" a young woman asked during the Q&A. Emma and Theo exchanged glances, a private understanding passing between them. "How finding your harshest critic can sometimes mean finding your greatest advocate," Theo answered. "Emma saw through the persona to the person underneath and challenged me to remember who I really was. And I learned," Emma added quietly, "that sometimes the people we're quickest to judge are the ones we recognize something of ourselves in." My criticism came from disappointment because I sensed genuine purpose beneath the packaging. After the event, they walked through the snowy Brooklyn streets, comfortable in a silence that had become familiar. "Would you have believed this outcome when you applied for the assistant position?" Theo asked. Emma shook her head, smiling. "Not remotely, and I expected to confirm all my worst suspicions." And instead, I discovered that genuine connection begins when we stop performing for each other, when we dare to be seen, flaws, doubts, and all. Their fingers intertwined as they walked, no longer author and assistant, critic and subject, but partners in the truest sense. Two people who had found authenticity in the last place either expected to look. Sometimes, Emma reflected, the only person who can make you honest is the one who never believed you in the first place. Theo nodded, completing the thought. And sometimes, love isn't born from blind admiration, but from being truly seen, perhaps for the first time. The path ahead remained unwritten, but they would face it together, with questions rather than answers, with authenticity rather than performance, with the courage to remove masks and discover what waited underneath. For in the end, their story wasn't about fame or criticism or even writing. It was about the profound courage required to stand before another person without pretense, and the extraordinary love that can grow in that sacred space of truth. Thank you for joining us on Theo and Emma's journey from masks to authenticity. Their story reminds us that true connection begins when we dare to be seen for who we really are, flaws, doubts, and all. Perhaps in your own life, there's someone who needs you to remove your mask, or someone whose true self you've yet to discover beneath their carefully crafted image. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the courage it takes to be genuine in a world that often rewards performance. Share in the comments one mask you're ready to remove in your own life. Your vulnerability might just inspire someone else's courage. Remember, sometimes the most beautiful connections begin with our most honest moments.